So, folks, today we are doing kind of the third part of just a multi-part series, each kind of focusing on a different aspect. The first part, I kind of talked about my grounding and my way I view society, power, money, etc. We talked about capitalism, socialism, etc. We covered all that in part one. In part two, we covered Richard Wolff talking about reform versus revolution, one of the fundamental questions posed within left-leaning movements for the last 100 years or so. And now we're covering kind of what I consider a conversation between two different wings that represent reform versus revolution. And I think that this is I think this conversation actually gets kind of at the heart of what the current dynamic is, the current conversation taking place within the Democratic Party, and how we might be able to navigate it. And I thought we can talk about this because as far as like a synthesis of reform and revolution, I think Sam Seder actually is a pretty good advocate for that. I think generally speaking, his ideas, despite the fact that he eschews labels, tend towards the revolutionary, i.e. like Medicare for all, like a policy that would fundamentally change our current paradigm, And so I think that he can be a good stand-in for this at least in some capacity. Obviously, people are going to have gripes with him on this, but in this conversation he has with Ezra Klein, I think that this dynamic really comes to the fore, and I find it really fascinating, and I wanted to go over it with you guys. So before we get into it, remember to like, comment, and subscribe, okay? You guys have been really helping the channel out. We've just passed more subscribers on YouTube than we have on Twitch. So we're growing the channel. It's getting bigger. I've had the Twitch channel twice as long, and now YouTube is bigger. So thank you for those of you who are helping the channel grow. I really, really appreciate it. And with that, let's get into it, shall we? I found this to be a fascinating back and forth, and I think you guys will too. Here we go.
To us, our efficiency is a quotient not particularly high, and so you were on the Iglesias's show, I guess the Slow Boring podcast, and mentioned that we hadn't responded. So we wanted to have you on to talk about the book. We had Paul Glastis on from.
Oh no, I don't believe this is. I don't think this is brain rot. I think this is like the fundamental question happening within the Democratic Party right now.
Washington Monthly, your old haunt.
Oh, where I interned. Love Paul.
With a critique that was, I think, like a middling critique. Some of the proposals that were brought up in the book. But let's just start with you outlining, like, what thematically, what is the book about?
The book is about a very simple question, which is, what do we need more of and how do we get it? And then the parts of the book that I think have aroused more controversy, critique, energy, conversation, is that much of the book is exploring the question of why in the places Democrats govern, or in the times when Democrats govern, are liberals, are Democrats, are in some cases people on the left, unable to produce more of the things we need. Why is there so little housing in California and New York? Sam, where are you? Just so I have you.
In New York.
You're in New York. So why in places like New York and California and Illinois, where you have a lot of Democratic control, have they become very unaffordable? Why is it very hard to cite enough clean energy, even though that's become a major project for the Democratic Party? Why is so much that we do so goddamn slow? Medicare released its Medicare cards a year after it was passed into law. Getting prescription drug prices negotiated on 10 drugs took 3 years and will only go into effect this year, just in time for Donald Trump to take advantage of it and brag that it was him who did it. So this question of the sclerosis of liberal government, how do we actually make it deliver the things it is promising to deliver, is the core inquiry of the book.
And like, to me, I think that's worth inquiring about, right? Like that's a fine question to ask. The issue is, you need, in order to find the actual answer to that question, you need to examine power. Where is the power coming from? Right? And I think power, because I have pre-watched this again to be fully transparent. In this conversation, the idea of what power is and where power is concentrated is, I think, the fundamental not misunderstanding, because I'm skeptical that Ezra Klein misunderstands, you know? Because Ezra Klein here just doesn't seem interested in understanding power, and I don't think you can arrive at an answer to his fundamental questions if you don't have that understanding. And I don't know if it's a willful misunderstanding of power, a refusal to engage with the subject of power, or if he's just one of these guys that never really considered power and instead is just like, I'm not going to engage with that question.
And the culprits run across I guess like four sort of main silos, as far as I can tell. Like we have the regulation and bureaucratic.
I should also just kind of elaborate here real quick. Ezra Klein's book is about abundance liberalism, right? It's about this idea that essentially the only thing that is keeping us from being able to fully provide for everyone in our society, whether it's food or housing or clean energy, the thing that is keeping us away from that is government overregulation. And in that way, it is essentially a libertarian argument. It is kind of an argument geared towards, I guess, a group of people I'd call like Peter Thiel liberals, you know? If that even makes sense. But basically, his idea is, well, you know, you just need to change the way you regulate housing, or, you know, how you do that, and you can actually just build more housing, and by deregulating it, you can bring, you know, the cost of housing down to the same level it costs to build it privately, and that is the solution going forward. And this is just like neoliberalism. This is just a rebranding of it. And neoliberalism is kind of the poisoned pill that was adopted into the Democratic Party after Reagan, really. And it is to work alongside Republicans to deregulate, to crush unions and workers, and to essentially work together on those economic issues while differentiating via social issues, you know? And that way, the fundamental power structures of capital remain unthreatened by any kind, either main party, right? And so I view Ezra Klein here from my perspective, in a very less than positive light. You know, cards on the table. Because to me, this sounds like a rebrand, and we've already had several rebrands of neoliberalism. It used to be called Third Way. We actually, there was a think tank earlier this year that released, like, you know, a bunch of third way talking points, and Gavin Newsom's been running around with those. But, you know, this to me just rings as a new rebranding, so that liberals or neoliberals of today can like convince more folks to just that actually Republican economic reforms are great. It is essentially, yeah, and if you're like, wait, that just sounds exactly like conservatism, that's because neoliberalism was designed essentially to be conservative. So it's I fundamentally reject this because it is conservative to an incredible degree. Like, it's basically just, what if you did conservatism, but like you acknowledge that the planet is dying from climate change and that it would be good to do something about it? What if you just did conservatism? You know, like it's just like conservative with a lot of the brain rot cut off. You know, it's the new fiscally conservative, socially liberal, and like I reject that kind of ideology. And this is the issue here, because that ideology is loved by corporate donors, by corporate interests. This is why they throw millions of dollars into primary campaigns to back challengers to progressive Dems. This is why they throw millions of dollars at Chuck Schumer. You know, this is why a lot of the old guard, you know, you even get Hakeem Jeffries in there with like, you know, his corporate donors. And they want to foster this kind of ideological, you know, chess piece in their minds to like further their agendas. So that's kind of where we're at. And I appreciate it because this conversation, I think, is really enlightening about the dynamic between these two different wings of the party. Okay? Hakeem Jeffries is the darling of Bay Area crypto. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Red tape. And this is a problem both in terms of like building infrastructure and to some extent within the context of housing. There are, that housing is also addressed by like local, I guess, incumbent groups that have power there. The infrastructure, again, some of that bureaucratic process is a function, and we'll get into this, is a function of environmental regulations that end up getting abused in some fashion. And then in the context of like of science and innovation, it is a sort of a risk-averse funding. But let me, before we go into
essentially, like Ezra Klein is arguing that like liberals, we need a liberal Doge, and that's just so stupid, and I hate it.
Some of the specifics.
Big no thank you from
your perspective, because I've been reading a lot of the there's a lot of reviews of the book out there. It's also
have you read the book?
I have. Well, I've listened to the book. Let's put it that way.
That's as good.
That counts.
And to me, I like your read better than Derek's. Okay, but I've listened to both.
I listened to. All right, if you that just gives me a sense of at what level we're talking.
That's a different critique. But yes, I have read the book, and I've also read there's a tremendous amount of reviews about the book.
What is your critique of the book? I want to answer your critique of the book.
Well,
I don't think you do, actually. Again, I've pre-watched this. I don't think you actually do.
I will get to that. Okay. I will get to that. But from your perspective, is this a policy or a political book?
Oh, I don't think you can separate those two.
Okay.
I mean,
so
you know my career. I'm a policy
yes.
reporter from way back, but I think something that has always been central to the way I understand that is policy, politics, and process. And I think this is very much a book about process and proceduralism are all intertwined. The idea that you can peel them apart, that you could say, oh, this bucket is policy, this bucket.
And I agree with him on this. I just think that his policies lack.
His politics is not at all how I look at that question.
Yeah, and I guess we'll start with the policy side first. But broadly, my critique is there seems to be an absence of, well, I think the culprits that you've chosen in some instances are correct, but broadly speaking, there's an absence of analysis of power dynamics. I think that and the interplay of money and politics, or I should say power in our society, I think is problematic. I mean, I think that look, there have been questions about specific policies and assumptions I've read critiques about your assessment of why China is able to do certain things and whatnot. But and I also think the power questions really filter through a lot of what you perceive to be problematic. And then I think broadly,
honestly, vegan, that's a great way of putting it. Money is power coupons. Like money has no inherent value. You know, like we put money, we put value into money. Value is an abstract concept. And then we trade it around, and we've all collectively agreed that this money has power. Here you go. It holds the power of value. And so if someone has a bunch of that saved up, they have an enormous amount of power. You know, a billionaire can do a lot more damage if they're malicious than someone with $10 in their pocket. You know? So when we're talking about power, it is important to talk about it in terms of economic power. Because often in our world, that economic power is going to trump a lot of other things. A lot of other forms of power get trumped by the sheer amount of money.
I think it's also difficult to understand how this is going to function as a political question. But we will get to all of that.
Second. We'll do the second in a minute.
But let's do the policy.
Let me talk about power. Let me talk about power.
Please.
I have been interested to see this critique develop. And I just had Zephyr teach out on my show. There's an episode with her and Shoukat Chakrabarti called Abundance in the Left that I think people would be interested to hear sort of do the power debate at some length. I think this has been very revealing to me about what my friends on the left, and I think of myself usually as on the left, though, a liberal, not a leftist, I guess, mean when they say power. I think this is a book entirely about power, but it is a book that treats power highly situationally.
That's the problem. You wrote an entire book about power, and then you're like, well, power is very situational, when I don't know that that's necessarily the case.
So there is a structure of power.
To maybe give an example of what I mean, you can have a situation where, a group of impoverished people have more power over, I don't know, a lost rich tourist. You know, they might be able to surround the tourist, rob them, whatever. You know, they have more power. They have numbers. They have social bond that individual is not a part of. They can use that power how they will, right? But in the grand scheme of things, it's a small group of 5 people in an impoverished part of town with no resources. They don't have more power than a billionaire businessman who can weaponize the state against them. You know, the power might be situational, but power in a broad sense, when we are talking about broad societal changes, it is important not to get bogged down in well, in this individual circumstance, if you zoom in via a microscope, you can't do that while ignoring the broader context of how power is used and how power is implemented. That's simply true. And if you do that, I think you're doing it deliberately because you don't want to talk or acknowledge that broader problem. And the broader problem in the case of abundance liberalism is that capitalists have accrued and consolidated power over the course of the last 80 years, since the New Deal, and now are some of the most powerful people on the planet. And you have to be able to engage with that. You have to be able to engage with the dynamics of a multinational corporation having trillions of dollars and wanting to come in to a small town. They can basically do what they want. The power differential there is insane.
It arranges itself around, say, a housing development in San Francisco. That is a different structure of power than arranges itself around the question of can you build interstate transmission lines, which is a different structure of power then arranges itself around the question of, can you site rural broadband and build that in the way that you want to, which is a different structure of power than you.
Because here's the thing, like, he's like, oh, well, these all have different structures of power, but you can have like almost any kind of structure of power you want. But if a billionaire comes in with like $100 million, they're like a wrecking ball through that power structure. You know, they're like, that's part of the problem here.
You see in a bunch of the other cases in the book. And one thing we are attempting to do over and over and over again is get extremely granular about what is happening. So one thing that bothers me about the power analysis that I hear on the left, let's take housing, because I always think it's very important to ground things in like a specific case. Texas builds more housing than California. It builds more housing than New York. When people move to Austin and Houston and Dallas, they build homes.
That is a great point, Left Foo. I think what I hate, and I'm just going to read your comment, I think what I hate most about this is that Ezra keeps referring to these concepts of power as if there aren't real people behind them with real goals and incentives directly tied to capitalism and money. Exactly. And as if the people behind these structures cannot be influenced by money. When in a broader context, they exist in a society where more money is more power to keep themselves and the people they love alive. You know, like it's such an important thing to understand about our wider context, and he seems completely unwilling to engage with that.
When people move to San Jose and San Francisco and Los Angeles, they don't. Is your view, do you find it a credible view to say that the issue is Texas has solved the corporate power problem, but California is permeable to corporate power and dominated by oligarchy in a way that Texas, or for that matter, Florida, is not?
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily, I think it's not necessarily corporate power. I think what we're talking about is money. I think we're just talking about money. And
so Texas has solved the money in politics problem, but California does not.
Well, I can tell you that, like, if you want to compare, let's say, San Francisco to Houston, right? You just have a lot more space in Houston. You have a lot more money in San Francisco. And so the power that rests with the money is more concentrated, literally, right? And has the ability in those instances to stop this housing project or that housing project. Like, look at Austin, for instance. You bring up Austin. Mm-hmm. In the course of Austin, and this was, I read this in the review, because obviously I'm not studying Austin or San Francisco for that matter. But Joe Wiesenthal wrote, here's just like one thing I want to point out here. Maybe I'll save this for later. I'll save it for later. I think there's a good time to bring it up. Never mind. You know, that his observation about Austin was that it was cheap, and then it got very expensive. Then there was, and it was a function of costs went up, rents went up. It became expensive there.
Rents have gone down in Austin because they built so much.
They built so much.
I really want to hold on what you said the first time. But San Francisco has concentrated money in a way that
see, just let him talk, man.
There's no change in the building codes, for instance. Like the argument that
the building code responded in Austin. So you can just go look. You can. I mean, I don't know if you guys are able to pull up data on the show and show it, but just go pull it up if we can. You can search Fred housing starts in Austin and San Francisco. You could just do this in general. You can look at this analysis across blue and red cities. But what the difference? Hold on, let me just. I want to go through this example, but we can go through a bunch of them. Houston doesn't have a zoning code. That's why it's easier to build there. I mean, I was talking to a developer there, and he said, "Look, the thing everybody knows about Houston, if you're a developer, is it's a bad place to be a homeowner. It's a good place to be a developer." And this is what I mean when I say the whole book, in a way, is about power. That in these procedural questions, in this question of how do you get housing approved, what we have created in many blue cities is a lot of veto points. And that veto point can be used by corporate power. It can be used by moneyed interests. It can be used by local homeowners who are not power in the way we would normally think of them, but sure as hell are power when you're thinking about whether or not to build housing. It can be used by all sorts of players. And so I think that one of the places where I quite diverge from some of my other friends on this is that I think when you create this level of proceduralism, this level of veto points, they get captured by interests over time. And that is a place where power can pool. Now, I think the place where I probably part, just to finish the thought, I think the place where I probably part is that I think that the left is often very attentive to power when it is coming from certain recognized villains, and much less attentive to power when it is coming from people who might in other contexts look like allies or just be local homeowners. But that can also be real power wielded in a problematic way.
Well, but
again, when you're talking about homeowners, you're also talking about already a wealthier portion of society. And like, for a lot of people who are homeowners, their wealth is concentrated in their homes, and that wealth does have power because, again, wealth has power. If you've spent $500,000 on a house, like, you have some degree of power within that, right? You have legal rights that like people who are renters don't have. You have, there's different advantages there for sure. So you can certainly find incidents where like homeowners have power over different zoning laws in their area because they're local residents who live there and own property interests. And like, sure, in those fringe cases, that can be that can be a factor. But in the vast majority of cases, the people with money are going to have more power to inflict those changes than the homeowners. The money behind these billionaires, behind these 100 millionaires, behind these venture capital firms is astronomical. And via that money, the harm and damage that they can inflict, the intimidation they can create, is difficult to put into any understandable frame. Good night, Dragonfly. Why isn't anyone talking about the right to home ownership and not just affordable housing, but universal home ownership? Because I think a lot of people can't really conceive of how that would work. For a lot of the reasons people don't talk about a lot of things, and there's just been a failure of imagination on how things can be better. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think Ezra is discussing with Sam in good faith. He's constantly interrupting. He doesn't really let Sam get his point in. And I think Ezra is engaging in as good of faith as he can, but he's married to this idea, and I think he came in looking for a fight, You
listed off 3 entities that have power: corporate power, moneyed interests, and homeowners. And I would suggest to you that in all 3 of those that you just listed, that money is ultimately the controlling factor.
Yes.
So for it,
money is ultimately the factor through which we transfer power and like get people to do things that they might not normally do.
For instance, I can tell you, like,
Uncle Gumbald, I think Ezra Klein would describe himself as a lib. I would describe him as a neo-lib. Essentially someone who's pretty okay with conservatism if conservatism did more about like, the planet dying.
I don't know San Francisco. I don't know Austin. I know Worcester, Mass. And I can tell you that during urban renewal, we had, there was an entire neighborhood that was completely, I don't know if you've ever been to Worcester, gone through 290. There was an entire neighborhood called Laurel Clayton, I think it was, that ended up dumping people into a housing project, Plumley Village. And it was all run by the Worcester Redevelopment Authority. It was completely streamlined. None of the other, what we would call today groups. There was no equity involved in this, or equitable justice or anything like this. And the neighborhood was completely destroyed because the input only essentially came from this big insurance company and the Worcester Redevelopment Authority, which was essentially owned by the same type of people.
Yeah, because the insurance company, with its massive amount of resources, can simply just stack that subgroup, and suddenly you have full control to do whatever you want in that area. It's why these private corporations and these billionaires want to create their network states. They want to create their little city states where they have complete and utter control over every facet of the lives of the people who live there, and effectively can be little kings. They want to be able to extract as much value out of it as possible by undoing literally every kind of like social, political, legal protection you have in the interest of furthering their own wealth. When you hear these people talk about deregulation, it's notable that often they're just talking in a broad general sense, because it's deregulation for deregulation's sake is very dangerous. You can imagine scenarios where there are regulations that need to change, either because they're out of date or because they're just no longer applicable or what have you. They're an undue burden, and like we found out new breaking information that actually something is safe when we thought it wasn't. There are reasons to deregulate in specific instances. But if you're just pushing deregulation for deregulation's sake, or deregulation for the sake of capital so that people can make more money, like, yeah, even at the risk of maybe their customers or the safety of their goods, like, I think maybe it's a really dangerous thing, actually. This entire path we're talking about is what leads us to Donald Trump being in power. The path that Ezra Klein is talking about is what led, the fundamental system that led to conservatives being where they are now, being essentially fascist puppets to billionaires.
And I only know about this because a buddy of mine was homeless in high school because of how much destruction generationally it had created.
That's a really good point, Javier Valenzuela. There's a reason something like what Sam is describing doesn't happen in the wealthiest of neighborhoods unless the owners want it. It's just money. They can say power can come from homeowners, yes, if they're wealthy. And I think that's an excellent point to make. Usually, by virtue of being a homeowner, you are relatively wealthy and privileged compared to people who rent. Generally, again, very big generalization here, but generally speaking, that's true. And the wealthier you are as a homeowner, the more influence and power you're going to have to be able to make sure things like what Sam is describing, where an insurance company rolls in and effectively owns your entire neighborhood somehow, like that doesn't happen to wealthy neighborhoods ever,
as a result of that. And so when you list off those three elements of power, in my mind, those are all moneyed interests. Yep. Those local homeowners, I'm sure there are stories of low-income people who own homes in an area that hasn't been redeveloped, is able to stop building. But I would imagine those are very far and few between.
And I think we should be
there's a reason why we root for the scrappy underdogs against the giant corporations coming to like bulldoze their historic park to make a Walmart. There's a reason we root for the small community and not the corporation.
Agreement, right? If this is the case you're making, then I think we should be in agreement, because there's no doubt
that I'm saying it's moneyed interest.
It's sometimes money interest for sure, right?
Well, what is it the other times?
Let me finish the thought, okay. and then you can give me your rebuttal. When you create these highly legalist,
I disagree that a regulation can be a burden. The problem is not the regulation, but not understanding the regulation. It surprises me that even leftists talk about burdensome regulations. That's because sometimes our legislative system is deeply flawed. Sometimes people pass a bad law. Sometimes people pass a bad regulation. That happens. That like that's not a difficult thing to comprehend, and that's why I'm saying sometimes there are reasons to deregulate, to roll a regulation back. And that's because, hey, guess what? Sometimes conservatives draw up regulations that favor their donors. Regulate out the competition for them. Sometimes there are bad regulations. This isn't controversial. The same way there are sometimes bad laws. The wealthy neighborhood near me has a ton of control over the greater area, limited commercial zoning, and a whole bunch of retirement homes for wealthy seniors. Yep. Yeah, like I'm not against the concept of regulation. I think plenty of regulations are great. And most regulations around worker safety were written in blood. And, I think we should consider those sacrosanct.
Systems. The people with the money to hire lawyers and lobbyists are going to be more capable within them. And so the structure of a society that begins to bury so much in bureaucracy, where you have to know when to show up to the planning meeting and you have to know who the city council members are, like it begins to structurally favor those who can navigate that society. So when we talk about things like upzoning, where we want to make it possible to build more houses in an area, like everybody knows it is almost impossible to upzone a rich area. And that is because they are able to bend this process to their will. Now, you can take a place like California,
all right,
right?
Let me address that. I mean, I get that point there. And I think that is what worries, I don't know about other people, but that's the type of thing that worries me, because the argument you've just made is almost identical to the one that I would have every week with Tim Carney, who I know, back in the day, which is an idea that the problem with wealthy influence, and if you and I agree, then it is money. The problem with it is
we don't agree that it's all money.
Okay,
money is one mechanism of influence.
But I think it is the biggest one. Would you agree with that?
It depends on the issue. So look, there are a bunch of these issues.
Okay, well, let me finish my point about Tim Carney. He would say that you need to have less government. That way it cannot be as corrupted or manipulated by moneyed interests. Now, I don't know if you think that money is the problem 51% of the time or 30% of the time.
I don't think categorically asking that question is, but here, let me
see. This is why you need to have a foundation in the economics, right? This is why I think it's really important to understand the world from the perspective of economics, because economics shows you how power flows, how power consolidates, and where, power kind of resides, right? And if you are not understanding the world from like the perspective of capital, the thing Marx was describing in his work Capital, then you miss out on how this entire structure operates, right? When Sam is pointing out that like money is the common factor here, that's because that's how capital works, right? Like Ezra Klein is like, well, I don't think it's money all the time, but like money is the common thing between all of your elements of power. It is the medium by which power is transferred and the means by which you motivate changes in behavior, changes in regulation, etc. Right? This is why it's important to understand why things are where they are.
Bucks. Keep fighting the good fight.
Simric, thank you for the Bezos bucks and for being subscribed on Twitch for the last 9 months. I appreciate that immensely. So, like, it's important to keep in mind the way in which money plays a prime role in what capital is interested in. And what capitalism is interested in, what the major players of capitalism are interested in, capitalists, that trickles down through the rest of society, because we live in a society where if you do not understand capitalism and your position within capitalism, you're screwed. You need to be able to understand how things function, or else you are merely at the whim of the economic system. And even if you understand it, like, you can still get totally screwed over. And we all fundamentally, on some level, every single worker in this society understands that if you do not have money, you will be made to suffer and die. Right? So that fundamental coercion is present throughout all of society, understanding that people desperately want to accrue as much money as possible so that they are as far removed from the suffering and death destitution promises that, like, you know, we can save ourselves. It's self-preservation to accumulate in this society. It is one of the fundamental motivations to ever grow your profits, right? And I think not understanding that that is a universal under capitalism, a universal systemic issue. The refusal to acknowledge that, I think, ultimately dooms any kind of analysis that Ezra Klein might actually arrive at.
Let me say where I disagree with Tim Carney, because maybe it'll clarify where maybe you and I don't agree. Tim wants a less capable state. I want a more capable state. Tim wants a state that does fewer things. I want a state capable of doing more things, including the things it has already promised to do. So when I look at California high-speed rail, I work backwards and I say, what the fuck happened that the state of California could not build high-speed rail, which they can do in Japan, they can do in China, they can do in Europe. Tim looks at it and says, they shouldn't be trying to build high-speed rail. And so the disagreement I have with Doge, with a lot of different things, with a lot of my friends on the right, is they want to reduce state capacity. I come at this from as a liberal who wants the state to accomplish very difficult things, decarbonizing the economy, building enough affordable housing, including, by the way, public housing, building mass public infrastructure, things like high-speed rail or the Big Dig or the Second Avenue subway here in New York City. And what I see is a state failing to accomplish its goals.
Right.
Now, they would say, don't fucking try. I would say, fix the state. And one issue with the state is that it has become so highly regulated, not in terms.
I see, here's the issue here. I don't think that it's because the issue here is that the state is so highly regulated. I think it's that the state is operating under the capitalist paradigm and needs to engage in that capitalist structure with other capitalist entities, right? That price gouge the state, right? When we're giving out these government contracts, they aren't necessarily... You know, they might be a bit generous, especially if these organizations that are receiving the government contracts have been lobbying the government. You know, you don't have to look too far to find this happening. Just look at, for example, Elon Musk. Because, hey, guess what? Donating to politicians is not limited to Republicans. Surprise, surprise.
Terms I find that when I use the term deregulation, like people's brains turn off because they think of deregulation as something that the state does for the market. But no player is more highly regulated than the state itself, often by Republicans, often because of power in the way that you would define it. But I think a lot of liberals, a lot of leftists have, one, and this is my critique going backwards, ceased to see this, but two, they don't take state failure seriously. And when something like California high-speed rail happens or rural broadband, they sort of move on instead of saying, why are we not delivering? We are the people who believe in government. People are pissed at government for a reason. How do we make government deliver?
See, and I think and I think in terms of results, I think you and I are largely aligned. But I think the problem is, and you bring up Doge, and
I mean, also another problem is that, like, we're talking about building new infrastructure, like in the case of like California high-speed rail, right? Let's just take that as an example. California, very valuable properties. You have planned routes that go through private properties. You need to negotiate with those private property owners, or like decide if you're going to eminent domain them. You have to like get permission from different communities. You have to, move different utility like lines and substations. You have to get, environmental impact reviews. And then you have to deal with all of like the legal challenges from, other people who are afraid of the effects of the line, etc. So like you have to do a lot of stuff, right? The issue here is not that like, oh man, you have to do environmental impact reviews. Oh man. No, like that's something we should have. We should have communities have a period where they can give feedback on proposed projects. You should have like permitting requirements. You should have safety regulations for the construction crew and for like the eventual operation, right? And so I don't think the problem here is regulation. You know, I don't think that that is the case. Yeah. Also, we don't have the infrastructure all set to go to build high-speed rail. And I think that this is something a lot of people don't really consider. It's not like Japan has the infrastructure to build high-speed rail projects because they've built a lot of them. We don't really have that here, and that makes it difficult to do. Additionally, building a railway is a lot harder than building an airport. You know, you need a lot of space for an airport, but ultimately you don't need to build a durable and safe train track through various different environments and make sure that they can remain functional at all times under all conditions. You know? I don't know. It just, like, you also have to take into account that you have like people who want to privatize these public transit options. You know, Elon Musk did the Hyperloop, and in an effort to kill the high-speed rail project, like direct billionaire interference on top of all of those other things that were going to slow it down from the get-go. You know, we've got a great option here. So it just seems to me that if you're saying, oh, yeah, the only reason California doesn't have high-speed rail is because of all the burdensome regulations on building it, that seems like it's overlooking a lot in order to arrive at that conclusion.
It's ironic that you and Carney will approach it in a very similar way, but anticipate different outcomes. But that being aside, I mean, I think that is where, you know, people get a little bit
But see, I
nervous,
don't think we're approaching it similarly. I think it's at a level of abstraction, it's similar, and then you go granular and it's not at all.
But see, this is what we're talking about. See, like, it's their policy and politics are in the same place. So we have a level of abstraction, we have a level of granular, right? And the point is the way that these two commingle, I think, becomes problematic where these two things meet, because
also Sam and Moose has a good point as well. Not for nothing, but from what I've seen, the U.S. is failing to maintain its regular rail, and that is a result again of chronically slashing funds for our national rail system. It's a direct result of the fact that, like, we have private trains transporting goods. It's a direct result of the fact that, like, there has been systematic cuts to our public transit options in this country for decades in an effort to privatize and commodify, travel more and transport more and more, you know, because we don't want the government maintaining those systems. That would be bad. Thing is, how do you stop it? We have to have revolutionary reforms. Simple as. We need to have reforms that change how this works. Like, I don't know, nationalize rail ownership in this country completely and make it in the public interest. Like, create a new legal category that, like, prevents it from being defunded. I don't know, like, it seems like there are things we can do to create a system that cannot easily be rolled back by Republicans. And that's what we must do.
Your identification of the primary problem, right? I mean, this is the point. Like, you don't address moneyed interest per se in the book. The primary problem is, I mean, if you just do a summary of the book, primary problem has to do more with the regulation and the handcuffing the state has done of itself. But the state doesn't do it itself. Like, all of this handcuffing comes from a place, and it's either moneyed interest or it's not. And so, I have no doubt that at different times.
This is where I think you've really oversimplified politics.
Which is insane coming from the guy that's like, just deregulate, stupid. And which I know I'm doing oversimplification on his ideas, but, like, genuinely, that seems to be the general thrust of most neoliberal policies.
I want to try to find the right example, because I think if we stay high, we just are like yelling about this abstract question of money.
And this is where I when I was watching this by myself, I literally shouted. I was just like, money isn't abstract. It's deliberately created as a vessel that is not abstract, that is actually material. So you can touch the abstract value of money. You know, the purpose of money is to de-abstract it, actually. So, like, it is the medium by which we are able to obtain our daily necessities so we don't die. It is the medium by which you can, like, I don't know, if you're rich enough, like Eric Prince, you can just buy a bunch of people to create your own army and, like, march it on various small countries across the world. Like, you have real power with money. And to say, like, oh, well, it's just such an abstract question, you know, to really consider, it indicates to me that no serious contemplation has been given to the concept of power in this book. It seems like the opening assumption was, why aren't we getting these things? Well, it's because of regulations, and then working backwards from there and finding examples to justify that assumption, you know? That seems to be this book, and I haven't read it, and maybe I should. Maybe I should do like a book review of abundance liberalism. But there's a part of me that really doesn't want to give this guy money, so I'm torn.
But let's talk. We both believe in decarbonization.
I think that's really grounded, though.
Hold on, but let's talk about it from this perspective. Yeah. We both believe in decarbonization, right? Climate change is a problem.
Yes.
And we sort of see the pathway on that is we have to build a lot of green energy to reorient our economy so you can run a modern economy on a green energy basis. Yeah?
Yes.
Okay. So to do that, you have to move all this energy production over to renewable sources, and then you have to get the energy from where it currently is, right? A solar farm, a wind farm, a hydroelectric, project, whatever it is, and run it through transmission lines to where we plug shit into the wall and charge it. I have done a lot of coverage of this failure point because we are, to be perfectly clear about this, failing to build enough transmission lines. There is no world in which our decarbonization strategy works if we cannot increase by orders of magnitude how fast we are building transmission lines. There is money trying to build transmission lines. There is money trying to slow down the building of transmission lines. Just walking into this process and saying, where's the money, doesn't get you anywhere. Like, I have talked to the private equity figures trying to get a transmission line built. I have also talked to the green, New Dealers trying to get that same transmission line built. And I've also seen the people standing in the way of it who have all their reasonable and good arguments. I don't find, when I dig into these things, that the way I can just repeatedly sort politics is, well, like, over here there's the money and the money is bad, and over here there is the not money and the not money is good. Usually there's money on both sides of it. There are sometimes unions on both sides of it.
So absolutely there is money on both sides of a lot of things, right? Sometimes there is more money, and one of the things that I would say is that, while it's true that both sides generally have money in a lot of issues in our society, I would argue that oftentimes there's more to be gained by looking at how much money, who is receiving the money. That's important to look at. Because if you're just saying, well, one side received $1 and another side received 10, like, side that's getting $10 might be, like, able to do more with that, And I don't think that's a difficult concept, but also it's worth noting, right? Here's a study by the Brennan Center for Justice that concluded dark money by party. Both Democrats and Republicans benefited from hundreds of millions of dollars in dark money in 2024, and that is dark money from like untraceable, like, we don't know who's giving the dark money in general. More spending backed Democrats, as has been the case since the 2018 midterm elections. for which more dark money typically favored Republicans. The presidential race was the source of much of this disparity in the last year's cycle. Overall, dark money groups boosting Democrats put up about $1.2 billion to influence the 2024 elections, while groups boosting Republicans accounted for about $664 million, right? And so one of the things to analyze there, where did a lot of that money go? Who benefited from that money? What was expected in return for that money? And not only is it worth looking into where did the money go there, but also where might money have been flowing outside of this dichotomy? Might more money have flowed directly into Donald Trump's coffers? How much did the value of his crypto go up when he launched his meme coin? Stuff like that. Because a lot of what is happening is complicated. There's money on both sides, to be sure, but it's worth asking yourself how this all fits together as part of a larger picture. And again, I don't think Ezra Klein is really thinking about, the larger picture at all. And maybe that's deliberate on his part. I don't know. But if he's looking at this and saying, well, there's money on the transmission side, there's money on the not transmission side, there's people in the middle arguing against it, and it's worth then arguing, well, if there's money on both sides, what's the overall, how what else impacts this? What impacts this is not just regulations, but also the government itself, right? Who's building the transmission lines, for example, gets decided by the government. And there can be money going to government officials on that side. Or it could be the curry favor with the oil lobby because they don't want to build transmission lines that are going to serve green energy. There's a number of different factors that can play into this. And it seems weird to me for a guy who's so obsessed with talking about granular issues that he is talking about a slightly more specific issue, but still in very vague terms, right? And that leads me to have some doubts about Ezra Klein's sincerity here.
And so the structure of the book, because I hope people come from this and want to read it, the structure of the book is typically working backwards from a problem.
Which seems maybe not to be a good way to go. I'm just throwing that out there.
Building enough housing. If we go granular on that, what can we learn? We're not building enough transmission lines. If we go granular, what can we learn? And I just don't think abstracting out to money tied the state's hands. If money could untie the state's hands on a lot of big building projects, all these fucking developers would do it.
They do. I don't know how to emphasize this enough, but they do. Major government contractors that do building do this actually.
But it can't because the proceduralism takes on a life of its own.
I follow what you're saying, that in each case, there are specifics that are different and you cannot generalize. It sounds like what you're saying.
You can generalize some, but you have to take seriously the specific issues in each case.
I have no doubt.
Your generality should emerge out of the granularity.
Okay. What are the generalities? This is what I'm asking.
I am saying the default in America has become that building, particularly when the state is involved, has become too slow and expensive. We have created an architecture of policy that makes it too hard for us to achieve our goals in the real world, and for that matter, in social insurance. Say it again.
Who's the we?
It depends. You're not going to like it, but look, here's a version of the we.
Well, but I'm trying to address the point because, for instance, okay, so
let me give you a better answer to who's the we.
Well, but why I think this is important, though, is because this to me is the central question, really, about the book. Because I think, I could say there's some things in it I like, there's some things that I don't like, but the general point is, I think, for instance, where does the title abundance come from?
From Derek's piece on abundance.
Okay. we have seen an entire movement build up about abundance, correct? I mean, like, there is a lot of money behind this broad notion of abundance. And Derek, I think it was on the Lex Friedman podcast, said something to the effect of, there is a fight within the Democratic Party. I don't think he used the word for the soul of the Democratic Party, but for where we're going as a political political movement. And folks from the Nicholson Center have said, like, we have identified the Democratic Party is the best place to have this abundance agenda. And so as a political matter, they're not talking about, in that instance in the Nicholson, they're not saying, like, in San Francisco, we need to roll back this specific policy. This is attempting to develop a movement.
Well, I want to answer for myself here, not for Niskanen, right? So my first piece that leads
you were on that Lex Friedman podcast. I mean, that's
people should go listen to it. I stand by everything I said on the Lex Friedman podcast. But Derek, I believe I'd have to go back and look at what section you're quoting from. But Derek is responding to a lot of very heated left criticism of the book, which, to be honest, neither of us were expecting. The way I wrote, at least my parts of the book, to me, are extremely compatible with virtually and frankly necessary for all left goals. It's a book about affordable housing, decarbonization, state capacity. And my initial piece that leads to this book is in, I believe, 2021. And it is building off of the fact that the Biden administration is trying to do decarbonization through building a lot. And as I begin to follow that policy project, I begin to realize we're not going to get it done under these laws. So that's, I think, one very important thing. But I want to go back to what you asked a minute ago, which is, who's we? In this book, we is Democrats. This book is very focused for a very particular reason that we can talk about, because it's not that the only problems in governance.
Yeah, it's aimed at neoliberal Democrats or liberal Democrats in an effort to turn them into neoliberal Democrats. Like, it's aimed at rebuilding, like, the Bill and Hillary Clinton wing of the party.
Come from the left. They don't. My first book was all about largely about the right and polarization and asymmetric polarization. But I became very interested, having moved back to California in 2018, in why is this state governed by all these Democrats doing so badly? Why is it unaffordable? Why is it building less clean energy than Texas? Why is it not building enough housing? And part of the motivation for doing this book is there are a lot of problems Republicans, I mean, we're living through them right now. There are a lot of problems Republicans impose on the political system. But there's a sort of rigor and confrontation that I think is demanded when you look at the states where the people who, broadly speaking, agree with you are in power, and it's not working the way you want it to. You're not getting the outcomes you want to get. And so
Yeah, because broadly speaking, being in power in a political sense doesn't mean you can necessarily get your reforms passed without someone poisoning it with lobbyist backed garbage. That's one of the core problems. Does Ezra not know the housing market in Texas is getting ready to implode? No, he doesn't.
Story this book is telling is about a collision of the New Deal left, which is very, very focused on growth and building, and in many ways is very reckless with that, right? You were talking about Worcester, Massachusetts, which sounds to me like it's a story from that era. But we could give, Robert Moses is a classic story of this. We can talk about, we really do despoil like environments and poison streams, and we, run highways through marginalized communities and all the things people know. And in response to that, again, correctly, a new left arises. Ralph Nader, Rachel Carson, the entire environmental movement. And it passes all kinds of bills that are very, very, very effective and consequential in their day to restrain government's.
How is Texas's housing market cooked? Basically, Ezra Klein mentioned earlier that, like, they built a bunch of housing in Texas and, like, it brought all the rents down. And, like, the rents have been going down in a lot of areas around Texas. But that's also in part because they spiked, but also because they built a lot of housing. And they're starting to slow down building housing. specifically because there's this perceived glut of housing, and they want to stabilize prices. And when they start slowing down the building, like that also means that there's going to be a bunch of like, tiny McMansions standing open, available. Like it's going to be bad, because basically a lot of the housing that winds up getting built tends to be fancy, because of a lot of the factors. A lot of the factors around housing right now are, if you build, for example, an apartment complex, it is better financially, or has been for like the last 15, 20 years, to build fancier, higher income housing rather than low income housing. Because for just a little bit more money, you can effectively make it profitable for your apartment building to exist, even if, like, I don't know, only 5 units are rented out of like 40, So, like, that's part of the problem, right? Where most of the low income options get snapped up right away, and then what is left just kind of sits unused. And a lot of the slowing down of building housing, it leads to kind of like an implosion of the local market. So that's just to kind of like, again, broad strokes, but that's kind of what's happening in Austin. And then you get tax breaks and empty units. That I think is depending on your locality. I don't know, or can't really speak to that in Texas. I know that one of the popular policies gaining steam right now is vacancy taxes. And honestly, I think we should probably have vacancy taxes that are a bit more severe and punishing. There we go.
Ability to act recklessly and to do things without considering.
Yeah, exactly. He genuinely doesn't have a concept of fundamentally changing the system. Exactly, Alex Jungroth. Okay? Like, this is why I think this is a perfect example of someone with revolutionary reforms in mind versus someone who is merely reform-minded in a way that compromises with capital. And I think that is Ezra Klein, and I think our revolutionary reformer is more akin to the Sam Cedar. And I think that this is a perfect way of demonstrating everything we've been talking about for like the last 5 hours. So I hope this is helpful for you all to better understand kind of where I'm coming from at the very least.
And creating space for consideration of their impacts. So you have things like the National Environmental Policy Act and all these, bills and projects of that era. And then in this fucking maddening historical moment we're in, the problem becomes not that we're building too much, but we're building too little.
HCT.
And particularly building too little in the places where that new left was most powerful, California, New York, places like that. And so this is a confrontation with having created a very successful architecture to challenge, restrain, and sue the government that is now being used against liberal or leftist, for that matter, projects. If you would like the government to do public housing, say you think I'm a neo-shitlib, and you just want the government to do the public.
Yeah, say we think that.
Public housing. Great. I would like to see a lot more public housing too. The government cannot currently do public housing under the regulatory structure under which it operates. And yes, some of that is money. But it's also the fact that you can sue to stop all this stuff under the National Environmental Policy Act. It's also the fact that government, what I call everything bagel liberalism, loads huge amounts of standards and projects and goals into everything that public money touches. So
oh no, not having standards. We wouldn't want public works projects and infrastructure to have standards. Oh no. I don't want my bridges to be reliable. Oh no.
In California, it costs about 2.2x per square foot to build housing as it does.
That's a good point, Forlorn79. You can't sue to stop it if it complies with the EPA. Exactly. Like maybe I don't know, maybe comply with the regulations, I guess. I don't know. Just throwing that out there.
In Texas, fine, market rate housing, 2x per square foot. If you are doing affordable housing subsidized by the government, it's more than 4x. So why are we making the government's housing for the poorest people so much harder, slower, and more costly to build? And like, is that in the long run good for our goals?
Well, and here's the thing. I think that this is a decent problem to point out, that it costs twice as much to build the same amount of housing when you're doing it with the government. But I don't think I think that Ezra Klein comes to the conclusion that it's regulations, when my conclusion is, generally speaking, corruption or nepotism. You know, it's favoritism to people who are going to price gouge the government. Or alternatively, like, I'm also okay with government projects costing more if we have higher standards. You know? Also, it is worth asking, is it because there are laws passed that incentivize and subsidize building commercial? Just wondering.
I think it is important to confront why government, in the place where people agree with us more than in the places where they don't, is not getting the outcomes we both want to see it achieve. That's what the book is about.
And I don't know how much public housing is in Texas, or how much public housing is in Texas, or if we're, and that seems to me to be a relevant question. But the notion of the everything bagel liberalism, this is the idea that, like, we have constraints on federal money that a certain amount of union workers, or there may be a certain amount of equity associated with it. And at one point in
contracting and procurement, or a million other things, right?
And certainly, like, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that, we could go through these bills and find things that are problematic. If they are coming necessarily from, there's two issues. One is, there was one point in the book where you talked about, we have a choice whether we're going to put filters into apartments that are built, public housing built near highways, or the people are going to live under the highway. And it seems to me that there's got to be a third choice.
Yeah, maybe a third choice where, we give them filters and housing. Just I don't know. Seems like a possibility we could do.
As opposed to, we're going to poison people slowly, or we're going to keep them unhoused.
So I want to say specifically what you're talking about, that section. So I'm talking to Jasmine Tong, who's an affordable housing developer, does nonprofit affordable housing. And what she is saying is that compared to market rate housing, when she is building housing for homeless people, she is subject to environmental, green building standards, et cetera, that are so far beyond what market rate housing has to do that it often makes it impossible to finance the thing entirely. And a lot of these...
I'm just going to throw this out there, but maybe we should have higher standards across the board. Like, maybe people who are paying to build housing should also have safe house. I don't... like it kind of seems like you saying we should just build shittier, and like I'm like, why don't we just build everything better instead?
Projects, as you both know, fall apart. And I am saying there that it makes a lot of sense. You understand how people get into a conversation that we should have better than average air filtration systems in, affordable housing built near a freeway. But in a city where you are not building enough affordable housing at all, because, again, you have layered not just that, but a million of these onto every individual project. So, again, it's costing much more per square foot than market rate housing. At some point, you have to begin to choose.
Public housing is built near the highway. Why is that?
Say again?
Most public housing, some huge percentage of public housing is built near highways.
We're not even talking. Yes, that's all. I mean, listen, we're in agreement that that's all power. But when we are talking, I am saying that we are not building enough affordable housing.
I know, but
affordably
I'm
in
saying,
California.
why are we addressing it that far downstream the issue when we're completely eliding the issue that is upstream from that,
We're
which
not completely eliding the issue. The whole fucking book, man, is about wrecking these zoning codes that allow rich people to keep it out of their areas.
Okay,
but if you can't build it in the first place because you can't make it affordable to build, which the people who build it will tell you, I think that I've actually found the set of arguments I've had in this really productive in a way. I don't disagree with you about power, but every time we talk about it specifically, like, yeah, that's a problem. But no, we actually have to solve the problem. Like, if you want to make housing development by right, which I think you should do, so that rich communities can't stop it, and the affordable, like, I live on a block with public housing right now. I believe there should be public housing mixed in everywhere, but you can't build it if you cannot affordably build it. If you're going to, in Chicago, the mayor of Chicago sent out this tweet and he said, hey, look at all we're doing. We built 10,000 units of affordable housing for $11 billion. People are like, you did fucking what?
Just, yeah, can we just okay. So here is the National Alliance to End Homelessness. How much would it cost to provide housing first to all households staying in homeless shelters? All right. Housing First is a proven, evidence-based approach to addressing homelessness, yada, 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 yada. We conservatively estimate that an additional $9.6 billion would be needed to achieve this goal, providing rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing to everyone in a homeless shelter unable to access housing in a single year. Our analysis uses the most recently available annual homelessness assessment report, Part 2, Supportive Services for Veteran Families annual report, the Department of Veterans Affairs Homeless Programs Office data, to estimate program placement rates, unmet need, and funding required to house every adult, family, and veteran household that stayed in a shelter in 2022. The estimated gaps and costs are hypothetical for a few important reasons. They do not include the needs of exclusively unsheltered households in 2022. The estimates are for a single year, so they do not consider multi-year costs, and the estimates do not account for varying assumptions regarding self-resolution or other potential program exits and geographic differences in program costs and affordable housing supply. Concerns about program quality improvements and consistent fidelity to the Housing First approach should be a focus of future research and analysis. And I just want to really point out here in this report, which I'll link in chat here if you guys want to take a look at it. I'm just throwing out there that, even if you are like, oh man, well, okay, sir, sure, it's their conservative estimate. Okay, let's double it. Okay, to house every unhoused person in America, it would cost, if we doubled that, around $21.2 billion, which is literally nothing to our government. We literally send that to Israel on a bi-weekly basis these days. So all I'm saying here is that if you understand that the problem is money, then you have to ask, why is a government with a budget in the trillions not spending a tiny fraction of it to house homeless people in this country? And it's not because oh man, it's just too expensive, because we can do it. We have the resources. I don't know. The defeatist attitude of oh man, you only have the option to either breathe poison or, live under a bridge. It's infuriating. It's infuriating to pretend that those are the only options.
Whatever it was, it came to 1.1.
It's not even because the U.S. government hates the homeless, though they do hate the homeless. It's that having the homeless is a key part of coercing the public to perform labor that they wouldn't normally do. And so, in addition to that inherent incentive to the system being necessary for the capitalist. It's also that these people want to like profiteer off the government. They want to turn and commodify homelessness. They want there to be an underclass. Exactly. An example of what happens if you don't play ball.
$1 million per unit. If we're going to cost $1.1 million per unit when the government builds housing for poor people, we can't build enough of it. It doesn't matter where you're building it.
I mean, I think
it's okay. Death died today.
Even if I stipulate that it is exclusively zoning requirements or the everything bagel liberalism that is creating the barrier to build, housing. We can look at the CHIPS Act, and that was also something that had everything bagel liberalism built into it, which apparently, as far as I can tell, up until Donald Trump shows up.
Also, I'm just going to throw this out there, but if you create a system that streamlines the building process and is done in-house by the government, you can produce you can produce en masse at cost in order to do these construction projects to cut costs, right? Like you don't have to run it at a profit if you are doing the construction in-house. Unlike a construction firm, which has to run at a profit. Additionally, there are other ways we could do this if we approach this on a federal basis or even on a state level basis. And again, it just seems like there is a blind spot here, and it's either willfully blind or just completely created by a lack of curiosity. I'm not sure which, again, on Ezra Klein's part.
Was quite effective. The timeline of things, definitely, of course.
Hold. They went back and answered one of my critiques on the CHIPS Act. If you go back to that original piece, one of the things I'm saying is that they've loaded a lot into this bill, but taken nothing away. After that piece comes out, President Joe Biden signs a bill from Ted Cruz and Mark Kelly exempting the CHIPS Act from environmental review under the theory, as the administration says, that we cannot allow this to be delayed for years and years under environmental review.
This is the...
Also, again, if we're talking about building housing or getting housing in cities that have premiums on land and such, one thing you can do is have a vacancy tax. Tax empty units in apartment buildings to incentivize, landlords to drop their prices and get people in there so that they're at least making something rather than having to pay a vacancy tax. Tax these Airbnbs that sit empty most of the time. Tax all of these foreign speculators that just buy land and then hold on to it, or buy units and hold on to it and don't live there. There are ways you can incentivize existing construction to convert itself into public housing.
You can think that's bad or good, but if you want to say the CHIPS Act is going smoothly and well, it's in part because they took the critique.
Well, I think there are instances, and you talk about I-95, for instance, what Shapiro was able to do.
Pennsylvania.
The idea that, and my argument is, without that equity, you do get people living in apartments that are going to slowly kill them or give them asthma or higher asthma rates. Without that equity, you are going to destroy a neighborhood, and like we saw it in Worcester, and with generational impact. But I also think, as a political matter, it is extremely difficult.
Yeah, something like that, non-binary. Scotland we have a national system of property taxes, and if you leave a property unoccupied for a year, next year you'll have to pay 150% more the top rate of tax in Scotland. It's £5,500 per year for property. Yeah, I'm in favor of maybe even making it more expensive. Damn.
difficult unless there is some type of buy-in from everybody that there are circumstances that qualify as an emergency or an urgency that give you the political ability to do something like this. So, for instance, in the I-95 thing, you cite that as an example of where this type of like power, sort of centralized power to bypass this stuff is effective. And it was very effective in that moment. But if you contemplate like the constituents and constituencies who would be for it versus against it within, there may be people who are like, I got a store on Route 1, and if 95, that bridge is down, I'm going to make a lot of money because people are going to drive by. But outside of that, there was an alignment where in the fact that you could essentially bypass these things in a state of an emergency, there was the political will to do that. There was the political will to do that in the context of the CHIPS Act and to revitalize industrialization. You had buy-in. And on some level, it feels like some of what you're talking about with the jettisoning.
I mean, the argument against taxing properties is that either they'll try and pass the cost, though I'm not convinced about that argument, or that it will discourage speculation and it could lead to a collapse in home prices, which some people in some areas are very much against because they are homeowners and they want to maximize the value of their properties that they do live in. And, they're willing to fight for the higher value of their property, even if it comes at the cost of their neighborhood.
Of the everything bagel liberalism, maybe.
Do I support squatters' rights? Yeah.
It's like, it's not what you're talking about jettisoning is not the poppy seeds or the garlic or whatever it is on top, but it's like maybe the salt inside or, the dough.
Well, you have to be very connected to what you're trying to achieve. Like, I guess I would turn this question on you because I feel like we want to be, as you were saying earlier, upstream. Do you think we can build enough affordable housing if the units cost $650,000 to $1 million to complete per unit? Just flat. Like, can we pay for that?
I would imagine not, depending on the locality.
So what should we do then? Like, what is your view of what is pushed? It doesn't cost that much to build market rate housing. So what is your view? If when you trigger government money, you often double the per square foot cost in some cases of the housing it builds, or when you trigger government money, they don't get things like high-speed rail done. Like, all I want to do here, man, I'm not here for like a big like left liberal moderate fight. I actually want the government to deliver things I think we both want it to deliver. I don't want it to give people asthma, but I need it to be able to build housing.
The other thing to consider here is, again, even if that is an accurate figure, even if, let's say, it cost $1 million to create a housing unit, let's say that's true. One thing that's important about housing is it sticks around after you build it, right? And so one of the things is, okay, let's say you needed to house every single person who is homeless now in their own homeless unit. Okay. In January of 2024, 771,480 people experienced homelessness. Okay. Let's say you need to house that many. That would work out to $771 billion. Well, you could just spend $8 billion a year, and in 10 years, you would have housing that would accommodate all of those people. So, like, even if we give him, like, even if we say, like, oh, well, yeah, it's true, it costs $1 million per unit. If we just do it over a longer period of time, we can do it for a pittance. So, like, I don't know. Like, that seems like a valid thing. Even in his worst case scenario, it costs the federal government like 0.0001% of like the yearly budget to implement over just a 10-year period. I guess $80 billion. My bad. But again, just throwing this out there. Yeah, we've been spending like 20 billion every few months to Israel for weaponry. Like, I don't know. Like, it seems like maybe instead of spending like money on bombs to drop on children in Gaza, maybe we could spend it on housing the homeless. But also, let's just throw this out there. One, I don't think it costs $1 million per unit to house these people. And two, a lot of those people are going to be families. Each person is not going to need their own unit. So just throwing that out there.
Because homelessness is a fucking problem, and it is the worst problem for the people experiencing it, not for me. So what is your theory
I mean, look,
of how you get this cost of construction down, the speed up? There's got to be something here.
Well, it's obviously
true. We could house Americans and Gazans. I agree.
Localized, right? I mean, I have a sense of like in New York, how it could be cheaper.
Okay, let's do New York.
We do not allow developers to sit on land and wait for the market to catch up to them. We do not allow homes to sit unoccupied without it being a cost on those people. I mean, there is a lot of excess housing and space in the city that is being held in private hands,
okay,
so
great.
that they can maximize their profits.
Let's say we do all that, but we're talking here very specifically. The New York City is going to have to build housing that is affordable. We know, like, there are studies on this. You can read them. You can go talk to developers. Like, the reporting on this is like very straightforward. We know that when you trigger the public rules, it ends up being extremely, extremely expensive. We know that, like in San Francisco, where they would try to build a public toilet for almost $2 million, they do that here too. Why does it?
Yeah, except that, like, when you're trying to build a public toilet in San Francisco, it's going to cost more because you're in the middle of fucking San Francisco. You're not building like a rest stop in the middle of nowhere. It costs money to do shit.
Costs so much, and why does it so often fail when government tries to achieve the things we both want it to do?
I think property has been so commodified that there is such a profit incentive, such a money incentive to slow that roll, that it creates a whole litany. There's an everything.
We're talking about
there's an everything bagel.
We're talking about projects that are past that point. Like, I think that, let me be really meta clear here on what I'm trying to do with you.
Ooh,
because I think you keep wanting to pull it back to where we can. Let's totally premise corporations are terrible. They are bad. They're like they are your enemy. Hold on.
You keep wanting to pull it back and talk about larger issues of power, and I'm not really interested in that. You know, we don't examine how power actually works in our society, because that might reveal some inconvenient truths about my my political ideology.
They have their agenda, sure, and we have ours.
Yes, there are cases where the government is building affordable housing on land they own or they have already bought, or they are funding somebody else to build it, that is already nonprofit housing. This is just like, it's not being done for profit. We are not in a commodified system.
I would also throw out there that nonprofits still operate at a profit. And this is just how nonprofits in a lot of cases get more money. Churches are also nonprofits, guys. We still have mega churches, and those mega churches are nonprofits. All right, like, the idea that, like, oh, well, they're nonprofits, so it's not a commodified system. That's not how that works at all.
We know that housing costs more than the commodified housing costs to build. It is fine to say that it costs more. This is a totally reasonable interpretation. That is because wealthy landowners and wealthy corporations have colluded, maybe with other figures, on rules that have made it cost more. But which of these are you going to pull apart, right? This is the trade-offs that we are trying to force people to confront in abundance. You have to go into this thing and say, this is not working. I need to make it cheaper, faster.
Yeah, that I think is a very good critique of the book. Forlorn 79. Ezra is purposely choosing the most expensive places in the country, like San Fran and New York City, instead of other places. He wants it to seem like these costs would be the same anywhere in the US. Exactly. He wants to make a universal point about these highly granular situations, as he would say.
More achievable. Like, when you can't make the corporation your villain, what are you doing? Like, how do you approach?
Well, is that a question of making well, first off,
yeah, you don't have to make a corporation the villain. Good-natured corporations still have to comply with the incentive structure of capitalism. If they don't, they get destroyed by other people who will pay attention to that incentive structure. Yeah, this is why mom and pop stores get run out of business by Walmart. All right.
I think as a political matter, making the corporations a villain is going to be far more, you're going to have a far broader support than making, environmental groups or people seeking equity in housing the villain.
That's fine. But
okay. But then
walk me through the actual problem here.
Well, and then
walk me through the actual problem. I don't know. It kind of seems like rooting for Ebenezer Scrooge is going to be more difficult if he just remains Ebenezer Scrooge and doesn't have like his Christmas Carol revelation from the ghosts. Like, I don't think you're supposed to just be on his side at the beginning of the movie, actually.
I would say the problem again is that we have so greatly commodified housing. There is such a profit incentive to create these barriers. I know how they exist today. But the idea of unwinding it, you're just like, the whole book is about the idea that what was good intention 25 years ago, 40 years ago, has now brought us this problem. It seems to me that there's an attempt to restart that cycle.
I don't think that you can say, I really want to push you here. I don't think you can say that the reason it costs more money and is so much more difficult and is so much slower to build nonprofit affordable housing than to build market rate housing is because we've over commodified housing.
Why? Why? Like, it's have you seen the housing markets in New York City? Like, the commodification of the homes is what'll like bars the people without homes from having that. God damn it. Okay, whatever.
I just don't, or that Texas is better at building housing because they have somehow decommodified housing compared to California.
Well, they have more space. They simply have
plenty of space. If you go to San Jose, man,
they have plenty of physical space. It's not, when we're talking about plenty of space, we mean how that area has commodified land. In Texas, it's a lot easier to get land. It's a lot easier to get building permits. Because the land is cheaper. As opposed to building around New York City. It's a lot exponentially more expensive to get land. Much harder to get building permits. Because the land is more expensive.
There's plenty of space. It's strip malls and single family homes. It is one of the richest tracts of land in the whole country, in the whole world. It could be skyscrapers. It could be Shenzhen. It is strip malls and single family homes. We have plenty of space in California.
I mean, I can't speak to San Jose.
Like Silicon Valley is what I'm talking about. Like, you go ride around where these fucking venture capital firms, man.
I wonder why the venture capital firms control what kind of zoning laws are in the area. That's crazy. Who can say?
Promise you will not leave that drive saying there is nowhere to build a 6-story apartment building.
And do we have public transport there? Like, how are these homeless people?
We would if we could build it. That was part of what high-speed rail is supposed to be doing, which is why I'm so ripshit that it didn't happen.
And whose tax base is going to pay for that public transport and those buildings there? I mean, that's the point.
It was our tax base. I was one of the taxpayers.
I mean,
I am saying that I don't think it is plausible to say that the reason you can't.
Why didn't this place that I live in, that is, the biggest game in town, is the the venture capitalist firms? Why? I can't figure it out. Why haven't we built more low income housing here? Yeah, I can't imagine why. Can't imagine why the private venture capitalist firms didn't want any like public works projects built nearby.
Can't build in like San Jose and you can in Texas is that we've decommodified in Texas. We just haven't.
Well, we have plenty of space in the desert too. But the point is how are we going to? I'm talking about the places where you guys specifically make the point that New York City, San Francisco, these places are where people should be living and creating. And from my perspective in New York, having lived here more or less for 30 some odd years, 35 years, this place got a lot more expensive, not because there were constraints on zoning, not because there was equity. There hasn't been this place got more expensive.
I'm not I'm pro equity. I believe what I'm doing will create a whole lot more equity because you need to make the affordable housing. But in the book, if you've listened to it, I have a whole section critiquing Michael Bloomberg for this whole.
But the other thing again is that the people building the housing aren't interested in building affordable housing. They're interested in building luxury housing because they only need to rent out a handful of those units to be profitable. This is the problem.
Concept that New York City should be a luxury good. That
Yeah,
this is
exactly.
a whole section of the book that it is a incredible mistake that a lot of Democrats made along the way to sort of get into this idea that cities are like a penthouse for the upper class.
Yes, and I would suggest. I mean, look, there was a. This just came out, a report by the Fed, UCLA, that specifically addressed the question of whether it was housing constraints.
I do want to go back to something Sam said about you can build housing in the desert too. You can. But why would you? There are certain places people are more prone to want to live. There are certain places that, as a result, have more demands on the homeless support systems. Just because there are other places to build public housing doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be able to get it. You're going to be able to build it in the same way or in the same area. And that is a problem, right? But we have solutions to oh man, no one in this city is renting. Vacancy tax, baby. Go. You can convert different areas into places that have affordable housing options. You can, for example, New York City has a lottery for various affordable housing options. Expand the lottery system. Create, acquire new units as the state, as the city government, and make them expand that lottery system until everyone has housing. I don't know. There are a lot of different options here to make sure that it's not New York City isn't the playground of the rich and powerful, but acting it's the regulations that are doing it. I think that's kind of a openly obvious load of horseshit in some of these cases.
California Federal Reserve researchers found that constrained housing supply is relatively unimportant in explaining the differences in rising house prices among U.S. cities.
Have you read the debate on this report?
I haven't. It said higher income growth predicts the same growth. Okay, well, it's controversial. I mean, I'm willing to accept that. I say, I'm not a housing expert.
On some basic level,
to contrast,
right? If you have enough, things follow supply and demand. If you have enough of something, if you have too much of something, the price of it is going to fall, right? To argue that higher incomes...
but also listen to what you just said. If you have too much of something, the price is going to fall. Meaning that at some point the market recognizes that there is too much of something and it stops that production, which is exactly what happened to the housing market and is happening to the housing market right now in Austin, the city you referenced earlier. Like as being like, see, we just need to produce more housing. They are going to stop doing that.
Because, and this again, like I think in a weird way we would agree on this. Higher incomes are going to be a causal factor in restrictive zoning and building policies because people get higher incomes, they buy a house, that house becomes a major asset for them. And again, this is all in the book. The way they can protect the value of that asset is by making it impossible for
100%.
other people to live in near them. They are creating their own scarcity. And
of course, that is a big problem because homeowners operate in their own financial self-interest under capitalism, and that is true. And that is a problem to consider. However, it is nowhere near the size and scale of the problem associated with billionaire and corporate money coming into the equation.
So again, when I hear this book is not about power, to me, this book is all about power.
Well, but I still can't get an answer as to what is the primary, if we're talking from a national perspective, right? I mean, across the country, this is going to be a message.
The fact that he doesn't want to engage with this is extraordinarily suspicious to me.
Visited the Senate caucus to talk about this. Derek was talking about there's
very interesting to note that he just visited the Senate caucus to talk about abundance liberalism, and oddly enough, it's like that entire wing of the party, the Chuck Schumer, the Alyssa Slotkin crowd, they're all very on board to do nothing and embrace abundance. It's so strange.
There's a fight. It's happening right now. Our book is trying to win a certain intra-left coalitional fight about defining the future of liberalism in the Democratic Party. I mean,
weird that he somehow magically has that awareness in the past, but not right now. That's crazy.
If this fight's going on, and this is part of a movement. There's a lot of money behind it. I can't remember the organization. You'd probably know. Just dropped $120 million, citing the abundance movement. There's a lot of money behind this. What is the? I know that there are granular problems in each of these different cities, but
granular.
Do you think if there is a villain, and I imagine that there's, a good movement always needs a villain. What is the villain? Is it just we have overly restrictive zoning and
I think you and I probably
Storm.
agree that good movements are built on clear villains. But let me try to give you a good answer to this question. We didn't think the intra-left argument was with you. Just to be really blunt about it, I thought the neo-Brandeisians, etc.
Okay. I don't know if I'm necessarily a neo-Brandeisian, but okay.
You may not be, but they've been very critical of it. We thought the intra-left argument had to do much more with a debate that is very live. Again, it's a sort of New Deal, New Left divide to us between is the right future organizing government to organize the resources of society to create this kind of plentitude of housing, of energy, of infrastructure, these things that we want, of innovation, which is a big part of the book? Or is it more of a small is beautiful future? Is it more degrowth inflected? Is it more that we actually build too much already? Is it that there isn't...
Again, just as like a surface level response to this seems like some baby-brained horse shit to try and deflect away from the real thrust of embracing a neoliberal agenda. Like that's how this comes across to me. This sounds like smoke and mirrors.
Isn't enough meaning in things. In a weird way, Donald Trump has begun to really embody this other side when he comes out and he says, maybe the kids have too many dolls, right? You got 30 dolls, maybe you only need 2. You got 30 pencils, maybe you only need 5. So our view was not that the sort of fight that was live here was with people who worry about corporate power. It's that if you come from the places I come from, or frankly that you live in now and I live in now, you see a lot of Democrats who show up at the planning meeting and don't want any affordable housing because they don't want it to change their housing values. Yeah, you see a lot of people using all sorts of tools of delay in all sorts of directions to stop things from happening. And to us, like, I think one of the really profound fights is, do you think delay...
Okay, but also, should they not be able to stop things from happening? Like, if they're able to get community support? Like, those mechanisms need to exist for oversight reasons. So, like, again, I think the issue here is just you it's the money. It's the money continuously gumming up the works, the system. Like, I don't know, who's the bigger corporate, like, who has the most money and power in these situations? Individual housing owners? Or, like, I don't know, a multinational corporation with $1 billion in its pocket? Or hell, the snowmobile dealership down the road that makes like $10 million a year compared to your, middle class, like, oh, you own a home and you make $100,000 a year or something. Like, I don't know. Like, who's gonna have more power? It's gonna be the fucking people who make $10 million a year with their snowmobile dealership. All right, they're gonna be like the kings of the local area.
As a omnipresent tool of governance is a virtue, or do you think speed is more of a virtue? And if you think speed is a virtue, as I do, I think we should deliver government services much faster. Then what sort of moves are you willing to make that true?
I'm confused. What? You were surprised that your fight your fight was with the Neo-Brandeisians. Who did you think? Did you think the fight was like you talk?
There's a big schism in the environmental movement and the environmental community between the side that thinks we need to build our way towards decarbonization and the side that is much more about worrying that when we build things, we're going to change environments. We're, using things like the California Environmental Quality Act or the National Environmental Policy Act to stop things that might.
What would their movement? I'm trying to figure out who you're talking about. Like degrowthers?
If you
like, this is the thing that I 100% empathize with Sam on, because like, to act like people in favor of degrowth are the dominant power in this society we live in is insane. There's no money behind degrowth. There's no power behind degrowth. Degrowthers, by and large, are just loud people on the internet. Like, this isn't... Like, he's trying to cast degrowthers as like, oh, well, Donald Trump is the real degrowther. And like, no, he's not. You're like, Donald Trump is a corporate fascist. Like, he's benefiting his billionaire friends. Like, that's his big thing. Like, he's not doing it to shrink the economy. He's doing it because he's a moron. But his primary goal is to make his rich friends richer, to serve their capitalist ends. Like, people who are genuine, like the degrowth left that he's talking about, they're just online people. They don't have billions of dollars. They don't have millions of dollars. They're just randos on the internet.
Follow or report on any part of the decarbonization fight, you will find that the entire architecture of environmental policy we have is being mobilized against it in order to sue it out of existence, sometimes by moneyed interests. But there was a point in time when like a chapter of the Sunrise Movement, I think it was in Mass, signed on to a solar moratorium. There is a lot of conflict.
Wow, one chapter of one organization of a bunch of people who are like local to wow. Who has more power in this circumstance? Do you think it's Chevron? Or do you think it's like a bunch of activists in a group, like like 2 dozen people? Like, what are you talking about, man? I'm more a degrowther than a de-shower. Thank you for the $5 Canadian, worshiper of Olympians.
among people who see themselves as liberals committed to these goals, etc., on whether building is good or bad. I think that if you're looking very skeptically, but what do you think NIMBYs are?
Well, I think NIMBYs, for the most part, are wealthy people.
Great. That's a big part of the fight we thought we were about to have.
I mean, the Kennedys.
Yeah, because corporate and capital owners have the wealth, man. Are a bunch of bitches.
Yes.
Stop the windmills.
So now you're making my argument for me. Come on, do it. Give it to me here.
No. But when I look at the common strain through those people and their ability to actually impact policy, I see money.
Okay, but so you look at one strain, and I probably have a broader set. So let me give you one.
What's broader than that?
Let me give you one where we will disagree.
Wait, well, what is broader than that?
Because it's not just the Kennedys. It's not just the people you're comfortable
I know it's not
with.
just the Kennedys, but I'm talking wherever those NIMBYs succeed, I am willing to bet that the relationship between how much money they have and the YIMBYs have, the NIMBYs far more often than not will have more money. I mean, this is like, I know the research on this. Like, when these are contested, there's no doubt in my mind that we have regulations but it's to protect people's assets, and people who have assets versus people who don't have assets. And so, like, that.
This is exactly it. Like, Sam has finally arrived at the conclusion of this, which is that Ezra Klein, for whatever reason, whether it's just ignorance genuinely or willful ignorance, or perhaps just he's a liar, and I don't know which of those three options it is, has chosen to just ignore the primary mode of power under capitalism. And, like, that seems like a colossal oversight that he made in order to arrive at the conclusions that he wanted to push.
That is I don't know how you generalize it more than that.
Tofu Ghost, hello! Ezra's point sounds like wish casting, and he so clearly wants to avoid talking about class. Oh, it's so much. He's afraid. He comes across as afraid to even begin to engage on the topic of class, instead casting homeowners of any stripe as, all powerful within their local sphere. That's just not the case.
So I think on the NIMBY side, we largely agree, right? And so when I say that we thought there were different obvious sources of opposition, that was a big one. And again, as you know, there's a whole section of the book about how destructive it has been to turn housing into the central asset class and wealth engine for the middle to upper middle class, right? It's not true for the very wealthy,
and that is true. The association there is harmful and negative, and frankly, I'm not entirely sure what to do about that. But let's focus on getting homes for the homeless. I guess is kind of my take on it.
That's a thing people know. But here's a place where we probably disagree. In California, where I'm more familiar with the politics, the California Environmental Quality Act, which I think most people agree has overgrown its initial design and is being used to do things like try to stop UC Berkeley from expanding dormitoriums because more students are environmental nuisance. One thing that really defends it is that there's a coalition of unions that use CEQA to sue development in order to get unrelated labor standards concessions. And to me, that is a misuse of power. I am pro.
Oh my God, what a dork. Oh, they sue to get better working conditions. That's a misuse of power. Fuck you. Capital will never hesitate to use legal power and misuse it in order to achieve their aims. Fuck you.
Stronger labor standards. I am not pro radically expanding how much you can delay every single project in order to get concessions that were not in the initial architecture or vision of that bill. So yes, there is power. The NIMBYs are power, and the NIMBYs are related to money, but power is also misused by groups I feel more allied with. And that's one utility of focusing on blue states for me.
We had a union problem in the context of Medicare for all in that fight. Yep. I mean, there's I think you can find that all across a ton of different issues, and you'll have unions on different sides of the same issue because they're
carpenters and builder trades are very different in California.
But I think we both agree that the net value of a strong union movement is a positive, and actually, like a lot of problems we have in terms of across the board are a function of the deunionization of the country. So there's no doubt, like, we can find specific instances, and I sort of feel like that's, I think, part of what I have as a critique of the book. There are particular instances, but broadly speaking, when we're talking about coalitional politics, which is definitionally democratic politics, to move forward and to have power and to actually get things done, it seems to me you can't do it by diminishing the coalition.
So there we genuinely disagree.
Yes.
Like that.
There we genuinely disagree. I want to empower corporations to crush unions. I like it, actually. Because if they're trying to spread their union power the wrong way, nuh-uh, mister.
That is truly, like, I always want to be very honest about points of disagreement. There are places where I think we are actually aligned, and here I think Democrats have become way over coalitional, and I think it is a huge problem that we are not delivering.
Democrats are over coalitional. We're yeah, we need to we Democrats, we need to start throwing more people under the bus is a hell of a take.
Which parts of the coalition do you think should be jettisoned?
I don't ever talk about in terms of jettisoning, because I don't think that's how coalitions work. I think they just change issue to issue.
That's a very nice dodge for to essentially avoid saying he thinks Democrats should throw, like, trans people under the bus or something. Fuck, I hate this guy.
I think we should have such a level of proceduralism that forces this many giveaways to this many interests in every process. And again, to use an example where I think we would probably be
Can you
more
be specific
aligned.
about the interests? Are there interests that go across the board? I mean, that's what I keep trying to get at. Is that, like, everything is specific?
You keep trying.
It's money. It's money. We all understand. That's the medium through which capital operates.
I think my virtue is specificity, and your critique of me is I'm overly.
My virtue is specificity, says man who can't be specific about one of the core issues of his book. Fuck you.
Specific. Mine of you is you're overly general.
I'm saying, like, you're specific about the granular instances, but you say we need to have less interests, and I want to know who those interests are that we need to have less of.
I want to have. Let me go back to the Medicare example for a minute.
I can't be specific. Have to go back to the example I gave.
Because you brought that up, and I think it's a good one. We passed Medicare, sent out those cards in a year. When the Biden administration did two things I think we both probably liked, which is prescription drug negotiations and limiting out-of-pocket lifetime caps, or having lifetime caps for out-of-pocket costs. It took them 3 to 4 years to move it through a regulatory process that we have expanded with things like notice and comment periods and more opportunities for judicial review that can be utilized by, in this case, pharmaceutical companies, but others as well, to kind of slow everything down and force a lot of concession. I want to break that process and make it much more under agency discretion, what they do, and make it harder to challenge. In that case, that's going to hurt pharmaceutical companies, right? So I think that you and I would like it. In the California housing case, I want to make housing construction much closer to by right, right? I want you to have the right to build the housing you want to build, assuming it conforms to basic standards. This is what we've done in California for ADUs. It worked really, really well. A lot of people will be mad about that. NIMBYs, certain unions, etc. I would like to make it easier to build modular housing. Again, different people will be mad at that. I don't have one answer for you on who I'm trying to screw over, because I'm not trying to screw anybody over. What I'm trying to do is focus liberal governance on the outcomes it is promising people and get people to confront why we are failing to deliver them. If you end up with a different answer than me, that's great.
I have to be completely honest here. What this sounds like to me is him saying, let Elon Musk build his town. Except, like his town should have, affordable housing, and let's just move all the homeless into Elon Musk's company town. Like, genuinely, I'm being like a little bit exaggerating for effect, but like that is genuinely what this feels like to me,
But that should be a very granular confrontation with why high-speed rail didn't happen, why the Second Avenue subway is so fucking expensive, why we're not building enough housing. I don't believe you can do this in generalities in the way that I think a lot of people want to. I think that it requires a lot of confrontation with the individual failures we see, and then trying to figure out, okay, do things rhyme across these failures? Is there a level of government that should have the authority that currently does it? That kind of thing.
All right. Now, I've held you really long, and so I want to, but let me just.
Yeah.
So what is then the political, like, what do we organize around as a political movement? If it is in these various instances, people are going to get situationally marginalized in the process, right? I mean, or however gently you want to say, your interests here, we're going to ignore in these specific cases. What is the political message that's going to resonate and get these different factions of the Democratic Party on board with this as a broad message?
I think every national politician who succeeds tends to be reformist and highly critical.
Do you see why I talked about reform, revolution, the need for a synthesis of both? Do you see why I've taken you now on like this 6.5 hour long journey to like bring you to this point? Ezra Klein is the modern answer for our current context. Effectively, his proposal of abundance liberalism is it's the compromise with capital of our time. And what we truly need are new policies that completely revolutionize in a way that we cannot undo, cannot go back from. We need that. In the same way abolishing slavery ended the institution, asterisk, except in prisons, we need that for a lot of the problems in our current society, to undo and improve our society, not just to paste the pieces back together. Okay?
Of the era of their party that came right before them. Bill Clinton was very critical of the Democratic Party preceding him, sort of New Democrat, etc. Barack Obama was extremely critical of both the way money acted in politics prior to him. You might disagree about his actual administration, and then the Iraq War.
He was very critical of money in politics before he got into politics, and then didn't do anything about it.
Donald Trump was extremely critical of the pre-Donald Trump Republican Party. I think being honest with people that you have noticed the same failures on your side that they have is a very potent politics. Now, I am not a politician. I don't have to win elections. I have a freedom to say things that I think are true, that maybe Pete Buttigieg and Wes Moore and Gretchen Whitmer and whoever don't. So
this is, by the way, if I had to hazard a guess at which political candidate in 2028 is going to take this message and try and run with it, my money would be on I almost said Ron DeSantis, Gavin Newsom. Okay? Gavin Newsom, to me, is positioning himself exactly in the position to run with this type of ideology. And I think that should tell you almost everything you need to know about what this is and its purpose.
I don't necessarily come here telling you I know how to win elections. I don't think you should believe me or really anybody else who doesn't routinely win elections if they tell you that. But the idea that pointing out, yeah, we fucked up. Yeah, things are moving too slow. Yeah, you don't feel the government is spending your money well. I thought it was incredibly telling that when the New York Times polled this just a couple weeks ago, what you found when you polled people, like, is government inefficient? Plus 18. Is Doge a good idea? Plus 6. Is Doge doing a good job? Minus some significant number. Is Elon Musk doing a good job? Like minus 18 or 20. People believe, often correctly, that government doesn't deliver for them, that it's not spending their money well, that they're not getting what they want out of it. And I think going to them in the first order and saying, yeah, I am going to be relentlessly focused on making sure the roads I promised to fix for you actually get fucking fixed this time. We are actually going to build. We learned something about California high-speed rail, and the next time we do one of these big projects, here's what we learned, and here's how we are going to make it work. I could be wrong. I think it's a potent politics.
Which of the three Democratic presidencies that we've lived under would you rate the highest in terms of your policy set, in terms of accomplishing them?
Obama, but there's things you need to learn from that one too.
And that's a function of the ACA?
A function of the ACA, I mean, I think they got a lot done that was very valuable, but I will always say that part of my thinking goes back to that era, because you go back to the 2009 stimulus bill, and what does it promise? Whether it's big headline projects that are going to be the reinvestment side, it's high-speed rail, it's a national set of interoperable health records, and it's a national smart grid, and we are 0 for 3.
I would also argue they screwed up on the housing crisis immensely, and under Obama we lost 1,000 statewide Democrats, which is why I think we had such a poor bench over the in the following 10 years. Some comptroller loses their job because of the wave. I'm not convinced that we didn't get Trump as a function of Obama.
Yep.
I think a full debate between us on Obama should wait for another day.
That would be a different day. But Ezra, I really appreciate you taking the time, and we will link to Abundance and, of course, your podcast, huge podcast, and the New York Times is also a well-known newspaper.
I've heard of it. Yeah, a strong Northeast regional. Thank you, Sam. I enjoyed it.
All right, thanks, Ezra. All right, folks, we got to take a quick break.
That was
head into the fun half of the program, wherein we will have fun.
What's that?
I didn't feel like we could have done that for a
I wish we could have heard more of his thoughts.
Oh no, Sam Cedar! Wow, what a fucking nightmare!
Yeah, I think that Ezra did very poorly throughout this, and I think Sam did about as good as you could. I think there were just some times where he was really taken aback at Ezra's lack of willingness to actually engage. They do talk about it after. Wait, let's see.
It's your support. Folks, it's your support. It's your support. The free show, free of commercial.
That part. This is never on the show. Weren't talking, so I thought, okay, maybe when he said
get
we're
with the program. People should be listening to this show on 1.5 times speed. That is.
Uh-oh. I didn't make you guys listen to it on 1.5 times speed.
Okay. Yeah, who's going to pay this $50,000 fine? It ain't going to be me.
I feel like I heard in the old archives you talking to Janine in like 2007 or something about how you taught yourself how not to, and you never swore on air accidentally.
We're back. Sam Cedar. Hey. Time where the Democrats need to build broader coalitions to fight fascism, Ezra still believes we need to kneecap portions of the coalition. That's a fun way to completely kill the Democratic Party.
To be fair, there are portions of the coalition, like Mark Andreessen, that I would like to see kneecapped. So, in order to fight fascism, frankly.
I fucking love Matlack. All right. The video cuts out in about 30 seconds from here, so I think that's about all we're gonna get. Yeah, it might be in the fun half. I have access to the fun half, but you guys are gonna have to wait. With that being said, folks, on-screen celebration. Yay! There you go. I did it. We did it. We did the segment, everybody. If you got anything out of that, please hit the follow button, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, do the things, hit the buttons. And folks, like, comment, and subscribe. And I found this entire dive fascinating because it really kind of goes to show how you can take overarching ideas about our current political and socioeconomic times and take it kind of from abstract ideas down to different historical events and how those historical events lead us to today. And I think this was a great 3-part series on doing just that. And I'm really glad with how this turned out. I hope you guys really enjoyed that. And I know I found it valuable. I hope you guys did too. And with that, we finished the segment, baby. We did it.
Riverboat Jack is going to town. All the viewers gather round. Twitch and YouTube is where she streams. All that content is bursting the seams. Politics, dating, plenty more. Her sense of fashion you'll adore. So grab your stuff and hop aboard. We're going straight to Jack's Discord.